Show your support. Subscribe to the podcast. Hello, I am That British Guy and welcome to NXT Talk, a special extra podcast this week where I just kind of do a bit of a review and give my thoughts regarding NXT Takeover Brooklyn 4. Now, I intended to get this video up a little bit earlier, but unfortunately, because of being away over the weekend, by the time we got back, I wasn't able to watch the show in its entirety and get anything uploaded for the Sunday. So we're a little bit behind the times. And for that, I mean, lots of people have obviously been sort of reviewing the show and putting up their thoughts. So I was just going to kind of breeze through things, just to still give my thoughts, but not go in too much detail regarding the matches, just purely because I'm sure most of you guys have already seen the show and have sort of seen other people's thoughts and opinions regarding it anyway. That said, the overall show I thought was spectacular. There wasn't really I wouldn't say a dud match. Certainly the EC3 Velveteen Dream match was a little bit curious, shall we say, but it wasn't overall a bad match as such, but I'll talk about that in a little bit of time. Now, the show opened up with the tag match, much like it did at Chicago 2, with the Undisputed Era defending their tag team belts, and this really set a very sort of high bar for the rest of the show going forward, built on the previous two matches that the Undisputed Era and Moustache Mountain had, and kind of developed that story a lot more going forward. And it kind of showcased what the company and the NXT brand, kind of how much they value the Undisputed Era as a unit. But it's nice to see Tyler Bate and Trent Seven really starting to get their kind of shine, sort of a year and a half after the UK tournament. I know obviously Tyler Bate won that, but it did drop the belt more than a year ago now to Pete Dunne, who even at that first tournament was kind of showcased as the main guy. But now they're finally kind of getting their just desserts on Takeover shows themselves, and on NXT weekly broadcasts. So whether this kind of was just them getting back in the spotlight for them to transition back over to the UK NXT brand, or whether they will kind of stick around a bit more now, possibly sort of managing each other as they go for sort of singles competition, maybe even possibly in the future for either the NXT title or the North American title, or whether they kind of just keep as a two-man unit. I'm not sure, but it will definitely be good to kind of see them pop up from time to time, even if it is just in singles matches, because they've kind of got to the point where I think they've won the crowd over again. Certainly they've kind of gone a bit cold on Tyler Bate after his loss to Pete Dunne for the UK title, but now it feels like they've kind of got that back, and hopefully with him now possibly involved against all members of the Undisputed Era, we could possibly get kind of 3-on-3 bouts, maybe even leading into the second Takeover War Games in a few months' time when we have Survivor Series. Obviously after the match, the Undisputed Era were jumped by War Raiders after they won, and this obviously sets up what we already knew anyway, that War Raiders are going to kind of be the next team in line for the belts, and will probably end up winning them in a few weeks' time, I would think, on NXT TV, and most likely what we will get is the Undisputed Era and British Strong Style going towards the War Games match with another team of three, and then likely the War Raiders will start on their kind of path of destruction as the tag team champions, defending the belts probably at War Games. At least that's sort of my assumption at this point. Next up, as I said, we got the EC3 Velveteen Dream match. Firstly, the result was very curious. Obviously, EC3 has only just come into the company at the same time as Ricochet, and they clearly hold them in very different regard. As I kind of already said, you've got them both debuting in that ladder match for the NXT North American title. Then the takeover afterwards, you have Ricochet facing off against Velveteen Dream in one of the best matches on the night, although it wasn't for a title, and you kind of had that booked instead of an NXT North American title match, and then EC3 didn't even feature, and then the one after you have one of them in a title match, which he inevitably wins a bit later on, and then you have the other guy facing Velveteen Dream, but this time losing. So it's very curious what they're doing with EC3, to be honest. It almost feels like they're not really sure what to do with him. I don't know whether this kind of stems from any kind of bad feelings in the performance centre or backstage, or whether they just feel that something's not working, or whether he's unhappy with the decision to go to NXT, or there is some kind of bigger, grander plan. But I'm just thinking that he's so new in that he would need at least... Obviously, I can appreciate them both not winning in the ladder match, and they're both kind of protected in that because it's multi-man and it's a bit chaotic, and as long as they get some kind of a showcase in the match, which again I feel Ricochet did and he didn't, so maybe it stems from that, I don't know. But his first singles match at Takeover and he doesn't win it. It's very, very curious. The match started off quite clunky, to be honest, as well. It took a little while for them to kind of get into some kind of rhythm, but in ring-wise, it certainly was the least sort of inspiring match, really, until the end sequences with the Death Valley driver onto the apron and then the elbow drop as well. Was quite a vicious, brutal ending. I think the only saving grace really for EC3 is that he wasn't able to hit the 1%, his finisher, so that's kind of protected, because the one time he did try and hit it, Velveteen Dream managed to reverse it, so there wasn't any kind of kicking out of his finisher, so that's still sort of protected. But I'm not really sure where they will go with him from here, really, what to do with him. Velveteen Dream did have on his tights about being called up, kind of a little plea to Vince McMahon, which at the time kind of you felt maybe that was showcasing what was going to be happening in the future, but apparently that's garnered a bit of heat backstage, so whether that was kind of him acting on his own, I don't know. I suppose we will sort of see on this week's Raw and SmackDown whether he does get the call up, because there are sometimes some call ups after SummerSlam, but who knows, we will see going forward. If he does stay in NXT, things are now finally moving in the right direction for him, but as for EC3, I'm just really not sure. Would have made more sense to give the win to him, and then when Velveteen Dream does go up to the main roster, he kind of gets an automatic reset, but who knows what is happening with them going forward, really. Now, speaking of Ricochet, he defeated Adam Cole in one hell of a match, to be honest, for the North American title. And the only really shocking thing here for me personally was the fact that they've already, on the first Takeover defence, moved the belt away from Adam Cole. I know that reigns in NXT tend to be shorter because guys aren't around as long, and obviously Adam Cole and the Undisputed Era have already been around for a year, and chances are they will be going up to the main roster, I would assume, after WrestleMania 35. So I kind of felt like he at least had maybe one more takeover with the belt, or maybe two, possibly sort of defending it a couple of times on weekly broadcasts for the time being, maybe being in that War Games match with the rest of Undisputed Era, possibly, just because of the whole three-man system, although Bobby Fish should be back and fit by then, so you could have the sort of the three guys who were in the tag team there, and then him sort of facing somebody for the belt on his own. Whether they feel they need to move him away from that belt so that they can potentially give him the NXT title, I don't know. To be honest, I don't know if he really needs it. Obviously, they've been very dominant as a group. They've been two-time tag champions as a faction. He has been the inaugural North American champion. I think if he'd have just held on to the belt now, possibly again at War Games, and then dropped it sort of in Royal Rumble weekend, then he would have had enough time to just get into one final feud, or maybe they could have got into one big sort of six-man match against, say, British Strong Style or someone like that, and gone out kind of in a blaze of glory at WrestleMania weekend before going up to the main roster, presumably Raw, after WrestleMania 35. But that aside, the match was a brilliant one. They just worked really, really well together. And it was nice to see Adam Cole kind of showcase his more kind of dominant, arrogant side, rather than his, not cowardly, but his kind of conniving, hiding behind faction members. There was no foul play in terms of that. He wrestled relatively clean, to be honest, just in a kind of a ruthless manner, and nearly came away with the victory. Again, making sure that he was protected, because his finisher was never utilised, but Ricochet's was, and that gave us a new NXT North American champion, which I suppose is good, because going into this show we had all heel champions, so it does make sense kind of redressing that balance slightly. And then they continued along that vein with the Shayna Baszler Kairi Sane match that was afterwards, that was really just showing how ruthless Kairi Sane is now, and the fact that she has got that killer instinct, and that, to be honest, both of these women have developed within NXT, especially Shayna Baszler, obviously being kind of less experienced in professional wrestling, and since the Mae Young Classic final last year. The ending was a bit unusual. It was pretty surprising, to be honest. I did say beforehand it was, as far as I was concerned, it was the match that was most likely gonna see a title change. But if I was a betting man, I probably would have gone down the Baszler route, as I did do. Having said that, as I said, the ending was kind of came out of nowhere, so that kind of protects Baszler to a certain extent, and just maybe showcases her inexperience, certainly against someone like Kairi Sane, rather than as a weakness. So whether she goes on to retain the belt and become the first ever two-time women's champion is possible. Obviously with Evolution on the horizon, and now that we know that Ronda Rousey has won the Raw Women's Championship, whether that plays into anything, potentially she comes up to the main roster now, although personally I think that might be a bit too soon. Who knows? I know there've been talks of a horsewoman match at Evolution. To be honest, I don't think that's particularly likely, and if not there, then possibly Survivor Series. There've been sort of mentionings of it. Obviously, if it wasn't at Evolution, then Baszler is going to need to be called up to the main roster. and Duke and Shafir are going to have to go straight into the main roster, which seems a bit odd if that were the case, for them to bypass NXT altogether. For that to kind of make sense for Survivor Series. Obviously, Evolution's kind of everyone's involved, so it's not so much of a thing. But given that Raw don't seem to be sure what they're doing with Sasha and Bayley, particularly, unless we are going to get a tag team division. And given the Becky attack on Charlotte, I can't see the 4 horsewomen thing happening, to be honest, because I can't see them working properly as a unit, and kind of putting that aside. Whether they add that into the storyline or not going forward, I don't know. But then you've got face Ronda and heel Baszler, and yeah, I just don't see that at the moment that's really going to work. Maybe that's going to be something that has to be kind of postponed for a year, once everyone's kind of up on the main roster and the face heel dynamics are kind of rebalanced potentially, but who knows going forward. Be interesting to see what they plan on doing with Sane and her reign, whether it was a kind of passing thing. I think it would be nice for Baszler to become the first ever 2-time women's champion. Just kind of gives her that added kind of star power that clearly they have for her and Ronda Rousey, and I'm sure they will in time for the other 2 women as well. Who knows? I kind of hope for Kairi Sane's sake that it isn't a flash in the pan thing, and she does manage to hold on to at least Royal Rumble with the belt, possibly then dropping it then in order to get called up herself, because there's not really, I don't think, any reason to keep her in NXT now. Obviously she's got the belt, so she's going to have to stay there for the foreseeable future, but certainly come WrestleMania 35 there's not really any reason to keep her down there other than to help keep the women's division strong, so that we don't get what we had when Charlotte and Sasha and Becky all got called up and you were just left with just Bayley essentially, with Asuka kind of new and Nia Jax being it, and yeah, it would have been quite thin obviously at the time, so we don't really want a repeat of that. So yes, we will see what the plans are going forward, I suppose. But maybe now this becomes a chance for the likes of Lacey Evans and Bianca Belair to finally challenge for the belt now that there is a face champion. So it does change that dynamic in terms of the challengers as well, which is quite nice. And finally we had what they were calling Chapter 4, I suppose. If we call Chapter 1 Takeover Chicago 1, Ciampa and Gargano. Again, building on the last 2 matches brilliantly. I was worried beforehand that the lack of Aleister Black and the triple threat in this was going to mean that we kind of saw more of the same. And it, although it did kind of echo what we'd seen before, it built upon those matches brilliantly, and was easily match of the night, certainly with the story going in. Was equally as kind of dramatic as it was brutal, as it was just well written and performed, and I wouldn't be shocked if this is yet another 5-star match that they've managed to put together, which would be Johnny Gargano's 3rd of the year, I believe. If that is the case, they clearly work well together. They've clearly had time and experience invested in them from the writers and the development team and the producers. Chances are this has got Triple H and Shawn Michaels written all over it, because it certainly felt that way. And keeping the belt on Ciampa was definitely the way to go forward. I think writing Gargano out for the time being with his knee injury was brilliant, because now they're forced to be apart from each other, possibly even until sort of Royal Rumble time. There's no reason to go back to this well now. I have a feeling it was probably something they were planning on doing, say, post this takeover, once they had kind of got through the triple threat with Aleister Black, but they were kind of forced to bring those plans forward. Maybe this was something that was planned for War Games, but it was clearly a change that was well thought out and well planned, which leads me to think that it was something that they'd intended. They'd kind of written it further down the storyline and just brought it forward, because the ending was a masterstroke of, again, similar to what happened last time with Gargano just going too far, that causing his downfall. Last time it just caused him to lose the match. This time it actually injured him and put him out of commission. So yeah, just kind of further spiralling down for him. I'm presuming when he comes back, then we get the match between the two of them at WrestleMania 35 weekend, possibly then crowning Johnny Gargano the NXT champion. But I kind of feel by then they're probably ready to come back up to the, or not back up, but up to the main roster, both of them. Who knows? Or whether Ciampa goes up after the WrestleMania 35 weekend, when Gargano then wins the belt, goes on to one brand. Gargano holds the belt until SummerSlam and then drops it, and then goes up onto the other brand so that they're still kept away, and then possibly after WrestleMania 36, after a superstar shake-up, then they get put onto one brand together, and we see the kind of fallout from this up on the main roster. But in terms of Takeover Brooklyn 4, a very fitting end to the show, a very fitting end to this part of the storyline and the rivalry, and easily, as I said, match of the night. It had everything required there for a 5-star match, and I will be surprised if it gets anything lower than that. So yes, they were my thoughts on Takeover Brooklyn 4. There won't be, because I'm going away for a few weeks, there won't be any podcasts for the next couple of weeks. I will not be able to be watching the weekly broadcasts. I still haven't even managed to see this past weekend's WOS Wrestling either, and won't be able to catch that. So there won't be any way of kind of pre-planning these podcasts, unfortunately, in order for them to come out on the Thursdays, and by the time I get back I will have missed about 3 weeks worth of programming. So what I will be doing is just picking it up back from sort of where I get to, maybe just doing one extra sort of summary thing of what I've missed potentially. In terms of the other videos on my YouTube channel, they will still be sort of coming out on the Tuesday and on the Saturday, because I will be able to kind of preempt those and pre-record them all, because they're not kind of time specific in what I'm doing, so I can kind of get those done and uploaded prior to going away. But yes, other than that, I hope you guys enjoyed NXT Takeover Brooklyn 4. I know I certainly did. Very much looking forward to seeing how we build towards what I believe they're going to be doing for War Games, and how NXT features in the Evolution pay-per-view as well. But until then, I've been That British Guy, and I will see you very soon. Goodbye.